The storm didn't whisper. It roared like a living beast. Snow lashed sideways across the Wyoming wilderness, swallowing horizon and sky until the world was nothing but white fury. The wind screamed through the trees, bending pines low as if they too feared the night. Beneath that merciless sky, Clara Monroe stumbled forward, one arm wrapped tight around her swollen belly, the other clutching the frayed shawl slipping from her shoulders. Her boots sank deep into drifts, each step heavier than the last. Every breath sliced her chest raw. Her lips were purple, her hands numb, and the child inside her shifted as if pleading for her to keep moving. Behind her, back in the valley, the men who burned her home had let her go. They hadn't needed to chase. The storm would finish their cruelty. Clara fell once, then again, snow clinging to her lashes and hair. Rising slower each time, her vision blurred until the land itself tilted. She didn't weep. There were no tears left to give, only the vow that echoed in her heart. My baby will not die here. Darkness pulled at her, heavy and final. Just as her body collapsed, a shape cut through the blizzard. Broad shoulders, a heavy coat, strong arms lifted her from the snow. Clara tried to speak, but the world turned black, and the last thing she knew was the faint scent of wood smoke, and a voice, steady and low, whispering words she could not hold. The world returned slowly, not with gentleness, but with a crushing weight. Clara stirred beneath layers of coarse wool blankets, her body heavy as stone. Her bones ached with a deep, gnawing pain. Her skin burned as if fire smoldered beneath. It and her belly felt tight and vulnerable, stretched to its limits by the child within. Disoriented, she shifted slightly, unsure if she had woken from death or merely slipped into another dream of torment. Warmth. For the first time in what felt like forever, she knew warmth. Not the bitter mockery of it that came when blood froze, sluggish in the veins, but true, steady heat pressing into her body. She inhaled shallowly, the scent of smoke clinging thick in the air, and opened her eyes. Darkness greeted her, broken only by the low flicker of firelight. Shadows stretched, tall across rough-hewn log walls, shifting and bending as the flames snapped and hissed. Her head spun when she tried to sit upright, her body protesting the effort. But before she could rise, a voice cut through the silence, low, steady, and firm. "Stay down." Clara froze. The voice wasn't cruel, yet it carried no kindness, either. Her eyes searched the dim glow until they found him. A man sat by the hearth, his boots planted wide, elbows resting heavily on his knees. His face was half hidden by the fire's light, but she could make out the rough edges, a thick, dark beard streaked with gray, skin weathered by years of cold and hardship, eyes like slate. Hard. Unreadable. "You're safe for now," he said again, though his gaze remained on the flames rather than her. Clara swallowed, her throat raw, her voice nothing more than a cracked whisper when she asked, "Where am I?" "Cabin," he replied simply. "Mine." Her heart stuttered. She clutched the blankets tighter against her chest, every muscle tightening in defense. "Why?" she forced out. "Why did you bring me here?" The man shifted, leaning forward to toss another log onto the fire. Sparks hissed and flared before settling into steady orange glow. His answer came without ceremony, without tenderness, without any hint of heroism. "You were dying." The words landed like stones in the silence. Clara's lips cracked as she licked them, uncertain of her own voice. "And you saved me?" At that, he finally turned. For the first time, she met the full weight of his eyes. They weren't cruel eyes, but they were scarred, carved deep by things no soul should have to witness. They weren't kind either, not in the way of soft mercy, but they held something that understood suffering, something she could not look away from. "I didn't save you," he said at last, voice steady as the crackle of the fire. I just didn't let you die. Not yet. The words hung between them, heavier than the storm that raged outside. Clara lowered her gaze, her strength too spent for argument. Her body reminded her of more pressing truths, sharp and insistent. A sudden kick against her ribs. She flinched, pressing her palm to her swollen belly. The man noticed. His eyes flicked down, narrowing slightly. How far along? Clara hesitated. She didn't know why, but lying seemed foolish. Almost 8 months, he grunted, leaning back in his chair, arms folding across his chest. Figures. You're too light, too cold. Baby's the only reason you held on this long. The bluntness stung, yet beneath it, she heard truth. Whatever this man was, he didn't waste words dressing them in silk. He wasn't soft, but he wasn't wrong either. Clara drew a breath, then asked, "What's your name?" For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, simply, Rowan. No last name, no explanation, no invitation for questions. She nodded, faintly. Clara. His eyes flicked to hers, holding them briefly. Not warmth, not even familiarity, but recognition. Survivors knew survivors, that was all. Clara, he repeated, testing the sound of it, before rising to his feet. His broad frame moved through the cabin with an ease that spoke of long practice. He poured something steaming into a battered tin mug and set it on the table beside her. Drink that. Slow. It'll help. She hesitated, eyeing him warily, but the pull of warmth was stronger than her fear. She reached with trembling hands, bringing the cup to her lips. The taste was bitter, sharp, nearly gagging, but she forced it down. Willow bark, Rowan said, resettling near the fire. Breaks fever. Won't fix how weak you are. Clara set the mug down, her hands shaking. She found her voice again, faint and uncertain. You don't have to help me. Rowan's reply came quick, steady, unbothered. Didn't say I wanted to. Just figured letting you die in my yard would be worse. His words cut sharper than kindness ever could, but strangely, they eased something inside her. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't trying to soothe with lies wrapped in sugar. He was simply telling her the truth. Clara had lived long enough among liars and false promises. This she could handle. Thank you, she whispered. Rowan only nodded, turning back to the fire. No more words. Conversation was over. Clara lay back down, watching the flames dance in silence. Outside, the storm still raged, relentless and merciless. But inside this cabin, despite the man of iron edges and quiet shadows, it was warm. And for tonight, warmth was enough. Survival was victory. The storm did not end quickly. For 2 long days, snow fell without mercy, piling higher against the cabin walls until the windows were swallowed in white. The world outside lay buried, silent, and suffocating. It pressed against the cabin, as though determined to crush the life within. Inside, the silence was different. Quieter, yes, but never peaceful. Rowan was not a man of conversation. He spoke only when necessary, and even then in clipped, spare words. Eat this. Stay warm. Don't push yourself. His voice came like the crack of an axe through wood, sharp and final, leaving no room for argument. He moved through the small space with an ease that told Clara this was not the first storm he had endured alone. Each morning, before dawn, he layered on his heavy coat and disappeared into the blizzard. When he returned, his beard was dusted with snow, his shoulders heavy with wood or game, his expression unchanged. He rarely explained where he'd been. She never asked. Some silences were not meant to be filled. Clara, left to the quiet, found herself measuring the hours by the rhythm of his comings and goings. She learned the way the fire settled into embers before he stirred it back to life.
the way the creak of the door meant either meat for the pot or fresh logs for the stack. Slowly she began to piece herself back together in those silent stretches. Her
body still throbbed with the cruel bite of frostbite and exhaustion, but the steady meals Rowan provided began to restore her strength. The food was simple: stews of thin broth and tough meat, smoked strips of venison, hard bread softened in boiling water. But each bite felt like defiance, a rebellion against the cold and death that had nearly claimed her. She ate, and with each mouthful she remembered the vow she had whispered into the snow: "My baby will live." At night, when Rowan sat by the fire, whittling scraps of wood or mending the seams of his boots, Clara would lie awake on the cot, her hands pressed against her swollen belly. The baby stirred often now, restless in the warmth of her body, as if eager to greet the world despite the dangers waiting outside. Clara whispered to the child in hushed tones, nonsense words of comfort. She knew Rowan heard, but he never interrupted. He never told her to stop. His silence was not dismissal, it was permission. They began to speak more in glances than words. When Clara shifted and winced, Rowan would wordlessly fetch another blanket or adjust the fire. When her hands trembled pouring water, he would take the tin cup from her, fill it, and place it gently back without comment. When nightmares twisted her sleep, leaving her gasping in the dark, he was there, silent, steady, a solid figure by the fire until she drifted back into uneasy rest. By the fourth day, the quiet pressed on Clara's chest, heavier than the snow outside. She needed to hear his voice, even if only to remind herself she was not alone in this place. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked suddenly, breaking the silence as Rowan worked a knife across a rabbit hide at the table. He didn't look up. "Since the war ended." She blinked, surprised by the answer. Surprised he had given one at all. "Which war?" she pressed. His knife scraped once more before he stilled it. "Does it matter?" Her lips parted, then closed again. "No," she admitted softly. "I suppose it doesn't." For the first time in days, he lifted his gaze to hers. The firelight caught his eyes, and for a fleeting moment they looked less like stone, more like something alive hidden deep beneath the surface. He finished cleaning the blade before finally sitting. Across from her, the fire's glow painting his features in flickering shades of gold and shadow. "You're not from these parts," he said, not as a question, but a certainty. "No," Clara replied. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "I grew up near Wichita, married young, too young." Rowan said nothing, but she sensed him listening. Truly listening. It made her chest ache in ways she couldn't name. Her husband, her late husband, had never listened. Not really. She faltered, unsure how much to share. Shame had become such a familiar companion that speaking against it felt like betrayal, even now. But something about Rowan's quiet presence encouraged honesty, even if it cut her raw. "He wasn't a good man," she said finally. "Mean when he drank. Mean when he didn't. Thought riding with outlaws would make him a king one day." Rowan's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "They killed him in front of me," Clara continued, her voice low. "Left me for dead when they thought I'd slow them down. I suppose they figured the storm would finish the job." Silence followed, broken only by the fire's steady crackle. "You're lucky it didn't," Rowan said at last, his voice quieter, gentler. Clara let out a bitter laugh. "Doesn't feel like luck. Feels like punishment most days." Rowan's eyes held hers then, steady and sure. "Punishment doesn't give you the strength to walk through a storm." The words lodged deep in her chest, unexpected and piercing. She blinked, unsure how to respond. So she said nothing, letting the fire speak for them both. That night, Rowan stayed up longer than usual. He sat in his chair, staring into the flames long after Clara had drifted into uneasy sleep. Outside, the wind eased, but inside, Something had begun to shift, something fragile, something new. The next morning brought with it a fragile sense of change. The storm had broken, though snow still lay thick as a shroud over the land. Rowan brewed coffee, dark, bitter, strong enough to sting Clara's throat when she sipped it. But it was warmth all the same. Her legs trembled when she tried to stand. She clung to the edge of the rough-hewn table for balance, her breath shallow, her heart racing. Rowan didn't stop her. He didn't rush forward or bark an order for her to sit. He simply watched, letting her fight for the strength she needed to reclaim. When she managed to stay upright long enough to help stir the pot of stew, she caught the faintest flicker in his eyes, not approval, not pity, but recognition. They ate in companionable silence, the crackle of the fire and the whistle of wind through the cabin's seams their only company. Clara found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. His movements were efficient, economical, never wasted. A man used to doing everything for himself. Yet beneath the rough edges, she saw no cruelty, no impatience. Just a man who had lived far too long with ghosts. After breakfast, Rowan surprised her. "Storm's broken," he said, pulling on his coat. "I'll dig a path to the well. You can get some air if you're up to it." Clara hesitated. The thought of stepping outside again made her chest tighten, but something within her longed for it too, for proof the world still existed beyond these four walls. She nodded. Fresh air sounds good. Bundling herself in layers of blankets, she followed him to the doorway. The sunlight blinded her. At first, dazzling against the snow. It was everywhere, sharp and glittering, turning the frozen world into something almost beautiful. The cold nipped her cheeks, but after days of being buried alive in shadows, the air felt like freedom. Rowan was already halfway through clearing the path, his strong arms moving methodically, the shovel biting into the drifts. Clara stood watching, breath clouding in the air, her body trembling not entirely from the cold. For the first time since that terrible night, she did not feel hunted. Not safe, not yet, but present. Alive. Rowan paused, leaning on his shovel, and glanced back at her. His face remained unreadable, carved in stone, but his words carried something softer. "You'll heal faster if you move more," Clara allowed the faintest smile. "Doctor and a hero, lucky me." Rowan shook his head, lips twitching with the ghost of something like humor. "I ain't no hero." Her smile deepened. "No," she agreed softly. "But you might be something better." The sun climbed higher, glittering over the white expanse, and Clara felt something she hadn't allowed herself in months. Hope, small and fragile, like the flutter of a bird's wing. But alive. Days bled quietly into weeks. The snow retreated inch by inch, exposing the brittle grasses flattened beneath. Saplings reached timidly toward the pale sun, and with them, Clara too began to unfurl. Inside the cabin, life settled into a rhythm so gentle it nearly disguised the sharp edges hiding underneath. Each morning, she woke to the soft stirrings of the child within, now heavy and restless. Her hips ached, her back throbbed, but she endured. Rowan, without asking, began stacking extra firewood beside the hearth before leaving for his daily rounds. Sometimes he returned with rabbits. Sometimes venison, sometimes nothing but his beard crusted with frost and his silence intact. They spoke more now. Not much, never much, but enough. Clara learned Rowan Hail had once been a man people followed. A soldier, though he never said which war. He spoke of it only once, late one night when the wind keened against the walls and neither could sleep. His voice was quiet, his eyes fixed on the flames. Men broke each other back then. Some stayed broke after. Clara hadn't asked for more. She knew the shape of that kind of wound. In return, Rowan never asked about her past unless she offered it. Their silences became a language of their own, a place where pain didn't need to explain itself. And yet, it wasn't just the past that tied them anymore. Rowan, the man who had once seemed carved entirely of stone, began to soften in small, almost imperceptible ways. Clara caught him once at the table, carefully repairing the hem of a baby blanket she had salvaged from her ruined home. His thick fingers fumbled with the needle, his brow furrowed in stubborn concentration. When he noticed her watching, he only grunted and kept at it. Another day, she awoke from a restless nap to find a simple wooden cradle near the fire. Sanded smooth, solid, built with care, no words, no explanation. It was just there, as though it had always belonged. That night, Clara cried softly into her pillow. Not from grief this time, but from something she dared not name. The cabin became less a shelter of necessity and more a fragile haven. The firelight seemed warmer. The silence less heavy. Rowan's presence, though gruff and unyielding, became a steady anchor instead of a threat. But winter, even as it loosened its grip, was not finished with them yet. Rowan began leaving earlier in the mornings, his return slower, his face drawn with something unspoken. Clara worried, but did not ask. Fear grew roots in her chest, silent but persistent. The answer came one afternoon when she stepped outside to shake the bedding. Rowan was crouched near his horse, tightening the saddle straps with rigid precision. His shoulders were stiff, his movements sharp. Clara's stomach turned. Something wrong? Rowan hesitated, then straightened slowly. His voice was flat, but his eyes betrayed the truth. Ran into men near the ridge. Her breath caught. What kind of men? He met her gaze, jaw tight. Not hunters, not trappers. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Panic rose, sharp and choking. She clutched her belly, the child shifting within as if sensing her fear. They're looking for me, aren't they? She whispered. Rowan's silence was answer enough. The warmth they had built between them cracked wide open with Rowan's words. Clara's hands instinctively wrapped around her belly, protective and desperate. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to deny it, to believe the storm had buried her past deep enough to be forgotten. But danger had a way of finding those who had once belonged to it. Her voice trembled when she asked, "What did they want?" Rowan's jaw flexed. Didn't say much. Asked if I lived alone. Asked if I'd seen anyone. A woman heavy with child. The air left her lungs in a sharp gasp. It felt as if the walls of the cabin were closing in, the snow outside pressing tighter, heavier. Then it's only a matter of time, she whispered. They'll come here. Rowan's eyes hardened like iron. His voice, sharper than she'd ever heard it, cut through the room. They won't. Tears stung her eyes, hot against the chill that lingered in her bones. You don't know that. I do. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. For the first time, she saw not just the solitude and restraint in him, but anger, pure, fierce anger. Because they'll have to go through me first. Clara's throat tightened, not at his fury, but at the ferocity of his vow. You don't owe me that, she said softly, her voice breaking. No, Rowan agreed, but I ain't about to let another soul get buried in the snow on my land. Not you. Not that baby. The words shook something loose inside her, something she had held tightly for too long. Her knees buckled, and she turned away, arms wrapped tight around herself. Why do you care? She whispered bitterly. Rowan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, his presence steady behind her. His voice, when it came, was softer, threaded with an ache she hadn't heard before. Because sometimes you don't get to save the ones you should have. And when you get another chance, you take it. Clara swallowed hard, shoulders trembling. She didn't pull away when his hand came to rest lightly on her upper back. The touch was brief, restrained, but solid as stone. I ain't asking for your trust, he murmured. But I need you to believe that if they come, they won't find an easy target here. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. For the first time, she saw beyond the stone exterior to the man beneath. A man haunted, yes, but a man still standing between her and the dark. Her voice was barely a whisper. I believe you. Rowan gave a small nod, letting his hand fall away. Then we prepare. Won't be caught off guard. That night the cabin was alive with movement. Rowan reinforced the door with planks and nails, checking every seam in the windows. Clara packed a satchel with what she could. Bread, dried, meat, a flask of water, ammunition. She stoked the fire high, filling lanterns until the room glowed with watchful light. When he was done, Rowan sat her at the kitchen table and set a pistol in front of her. You know how to use it, he said, his tone calm but unyielding. Clara's fingers trembled as she picked it up, the weight heavy and alien in her hands. You shoot only if they break through, Rowan instructed. Stay low. Keep the baby safe. She nodded, though fear gnawed at her ribs. Rowan, she whispered as he turned toward the door. He paused, glancing back at her, lamplight carving shadows across his face. Why are you really doing this? For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then quietly, because no one came when my wife begged for help. No one came when my boy burned with fever and I wasn't there. This time, someone comes. Even if it's just me. Her breath caught in her chest. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the world until only his face remained. She stood, crossing the small space between them. With trembling hands, she rested, her forehead gently against his shoulder. Rowan didn't pull away. For a long, fragile moment, they simply stood there, two broken souls clinging to something neither dared name. Dawn came cold and mean. Clara stood ready by the hearth, pistol clutched tight in her grip, her belly heavy with new life. Rowan crouched outside, hidden behind stacked wood and brush, his rifle aimed toward the ridge. The snow had begun to thaw, but the ground still crunched hard under the hooves of approaching horses. They came as promised, loud, cocky, careless. 4 riders, guns slung at their hips, sneers cutting across their faces. The leader dismounted first, a tall, lean man with eyes that glittered cruel in the pale morning light. He tipped his hat mockingly as Rowan stepped out onto the porch, rifle cradled in his arms. Afternoon, the man drawled. Rowan's voice was low, steady. Keep riding. That ain't neighborly, the man said, his smile sharp. He gestured to his companions with false innocence. We came all this way looking for someone. Not here, Rowan answered without blinking. The leader's smile widened, slick and cold. You sure about that? Pretty little thing. Dark hair, heavy with child. Word is, she ran off after some trouble west of here. The Howell family's been talking plenty in Harrow Creek. Lost a son. Lost a barn. They're mighty sore. Rowan's jaw tightened. I said keep riding. The smile dropped. The man stepped closer, his hand drifting near his belt. You hiding her, old man? Harboring a fugitive ain't wise. Law's thin out here. Accidents happen. Clara's pulse thundered as she crouched low behind the curtain, watching through a narrow slit. Every instinct screamed to hide, to run. But Rowan stood unmoving, carved from stone. She ain't here, he lied evenly. And even if she was, that'd be between her and God, not you. The leader studied him, weighing his chances. His voice came cold. Don't test us, Hail. We'll camp by the creek tonight. At sunrise, you best have her ready to ride. Rowan didn't move, didn't flinch. He stood like a wall until the men mounted up and rode away, their message left clear in the churned snow. When they were gone, Clara burst from the door, her heart hammering. You lied. You told them I wasn't here. Rowan was already moving. Toward the barn, his face hard as cut stone. They'll know by morning, her breath caught. They'll burn this place down just to smoke me out. He turned, his eyes cold and certain. Then we make sure they don't get that chance. That night, the cabin became a fortress. Rowan worked with quiet urgency, boarding up the smaller windows, reinforcing the door with beams and nails until it braced like the wall of a stockade. His movements were efficient, practiced, born of a man who had prepared for sieges before. Clara watched him silently, every strike of the hammer echoing the weight of her fear. Inside, she gathered what little could be carried if escape was forced. Bread wrapped in cloth, a flask of water, the few strips of smoked venison that remained, extra blankets, ammunition. She moved with trembling hands, her belly dragging heavy against her frame, the child inside shifting restlessly as if aware of the storm to come. She fed the fire high until the cabin glowed in flickering light, shadows, long and restless across the log walls. When she turned, Rowan was at the table, cleaning his rifle with meticulous care. Then he set a pistol in front of her, its dark steel gleaming in the lamplight. "You know how to use it," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. Clara nodded faintly. He had shown her once, weeks before, when the world had still felt distant and quiet. But holding it now, her fingers trembled. What if... She started, then stopped, her throat tight. "You shoot only if they break through," Rowan told her firmly. "Stay low. Keep the baby safe. That's all." She swallowed, clutching the weapon like a lifeline. "Rowan," she whispered. He looked up, his eyes shadowed by the lamplight. "Why are you really doing this?" He stilled, the rag in his hand pausing over the rifle's barrel. His silence stretched long enough she thought he might refuse to answer. But then his voice came low, quiet, roughened by memory. "Because no one came when my wife begged for help. No one came when my boy burned with fever, and I wasn't there to hold him." He set the rifle down, his gaze heavy on the fire. "This time, someone comes. Even if it's just me." Clara's breath hitched. The ache in his words pierced deeper than any blade. She rose without thinking, crossing the space between them. Her forehead pressed gently against his shoulder, her arms wrapped as far as they could around his broad frame. Rowan didn't pull away. For a long, fragile moment, they stood together in silence, two broken souls clinging to something neither dared name. When dawn crept gray over the horizon, it brought no peace. Clara stood near the hearth, pistol clutched tightly in her hands. Her belly throbbed with weight, each kick from the child inside reminding her of what she fought for. Outside, Rowan crouched low behind a barricade of wood and brush, his rifle steady, his eyes fixed on the ridge. They came as promised. 4 riders, loud and careless, their horses kicking snow into plumes of white. Their leader, the lean man with the cruel smile, dismounted first, swaggering forward with a confidence that stank of blood and arrogance. "Morning." "Neighbor," he called. "Hope you slept well. Thought I'd stop by for that conversation we started." Rowan's voice cut low and sharp through the air. "Keep riding." The man chuckled darkly. "Now that ain't friendly. You're hiding her, old man. Everyone in Harrow Creek's talking about a widow with a belly heavy as sin. You think we wouldn't sniff her out?" "Not here," Rowan said evenly. The man's smile turned sharp. "You sure about that? We got time. We'll burn this cabin to the ground if we have to. Make the smoke tell us where she's hiding." Rowan didn't flinch. "You'll leave with nothing but your lives if you're smart." The sneer deepened. "Smart men don't waste chances. At sunrise, she rides with us, or this place goes up in flames." He spat into the snow, turned, and swung into his saddle. The 4 of them rode down toward the creek, their laughter leaving a trail as cold as the wind. When they disappeared from sight, Clara rushed to the door, heart pounding. "You lied to them. Told them I wasn't here. They'll know by morning." Rowan walked past her toward the barn, his face carved like granite. "Then we make sure they don't get that chance." That evening, as the last light faded into black, they made their stand. Rowan checked and loaded each rifle, laying them out with soldier's precision. Clara moved through the cabin, her hand steady now, as she lit every lantern and placed them where shadows might hide an enemy. She packed the essentials again, this time with purpose, knowing flight might not be possible, but refusing to surrender, to despair. When the fire roared high, Rowan joined her at the table. He laid his calloused hand on hers, just briefly. "You're stronger than you think." Her throat tightened. "I'm terrified." His eyes softened in the flicker of firelight. "So am I. Fear keeps you alive. Don't ever forget it." Clara squeezed his hand, her breath trembling, but her resolve steadying. For the first time since her husband's death, she did not feel alone in the fight. That night, the cabin did not sleep. Rowan paced the perimeter outside, silent as a shadow. Clara sat by the hearth, pistol resting in her lap, whispering soft promises to the child within her. When dawn came again, it carried the weight of death on its back. The riders returned. Dawn broke sharp and merciless. The frost glittered like glass across the snow, the cold air slicing through breath and bone. Clara stood by the hearth, pistol clutched tightly in her trembling hands, her belly a weight that pressed with every shallow breath. She prayed silently, lips moving without sound, as outside Rowan crouched low behind the barricade, rifle steady, his eyes narrowed on the ridge. The sound came first, the hollow echo of hooves. Then, like shadows cutting through, mist, the riders appeared, 4 of them again, moving with cruel confidence, their horses snorting steam into the morning chill. The leader, his sneer sharper than the steel on his hip, dismounted slow and deliberate. He let his eyes roam across the cabin, the land, the high. Silence itself, savoring the fear he thought he owned. "Time's up," he called, voice carrying with the crack of authority. "Send her out, or we light this place and let the fire do the work." Rowan rose from cover just enough to be seen, his rifle trained steady. "You'll ride out now, if you've got sense." The man laughed, harsh and hollow. "You think one worn-out outlaw can keep us back? You're half dead already. Step aside and let her come. She don't belong to you." "She don't belong to you either," Rowan replied, voice even but sharp as a blade. The leader's hand twitched toward his revolver. "Then I reckon we'll take what's ours." The world shattered in a single crack of gunfire. Rowan's rifle barked, and the leader staggered, clutching his shoulder as blood soaked through his coat. His scream tore the morning open, and chaos erupted. The others drew fast, firing wild into the cabin walls. Splinters rained down as bullets tore through the wood. Clara dropped low behind the hearth, heart hammering, pistol clutched so tight her knuckles went white. Smoke from the fire mingled with gunpowder until the air itself burned in her lungs. Rowan moved like a man who had lived this moment too many times before. He stayed low, firing in measured bursts, each shot deliberate, precise. One rider dropped, falling backward into the snow. Another ducked behind his horse, only to scream as Rowan's second bullet shattered bone. The gunfight was fast, brutal, the kind of violence the frontier was born on. Inside, Clara's ears rang with each thunderous shot. Her pulse hammered until she thought it might burst, but she kept her eyes sharp, her body low. Then, sudden, searing pain lanced through her belly. She gasped, the pistol slipping from her grip as she doubled over. Not now. Her body didn't. Listen. Another wave tore through her, sharper, deeper, undeniable. Clara clutched her stomach, nails digging into fabric as her knees buckled. The baby. The child was coming. "Rowan!" she screamed, her voice ragged. Outside, the fight still roared. Rowan fired, cursed under his breath, and broke cover just long enough to drive the last of the attackers back down the ridge. The survivors fled, dragging their wounded leader with them, their shouts fading into the trees. The snow settled into silence, broken only by Rowan's harsh breathing. He didn't waste time. He slammed through the cabin door, rifle still smoking, in his hands. His eyes landed on Clara, crumpled near the hearth, her face pale, her body shaking. "The baby," she gasped, her voice breaking. "It's time." Rowan was at her side in an instant, his rifle clattering forgotten to the floor. He gathered her into his arms, lifting her with care that belied his size and strength. She cried out as another wave of pain split through her, her body writhing against his grip. "I can't," she sobbed, clutching his shirt. "Yes, you can," he said firmly, his voice the only anchor in the storm. "And you will. I've got you." He carried her to the cot, piling every blanket beneath and around her, feeding the fire until the cabin glowed hot against the encroaching cold. His hands moved quick, gathering water, cloth, anything that could serve. His face was hard, his jaw clenched, but his eyes stayed steady, locked on her with a focus that did not waver. Clara gripped his wrist with desperate strength. Her nails dug into his skin as the first wave ripped through her again. She screamed, the sound raw, primal, echoing off the log walls. Rowan didn't flinch. He wiped sweat from her brow, his deep voice threading through her cries like a rope. "Breathe. You're stronger than this storm. Push when it tells you." Time became a blur of agony and firelight. Clara bore down, wave after wave tearing her apart, each cry splitting her throat raw. She thought she might die, thought the pain might end her before she ever saw her child's face. But Rowan's voice never left her. Steady, certain, a lifeline. "Push. Clara, that's it. You're stronger than you know. One more." The world narrowed to pain, and his voice, until at last, a sound pierced the storm inside her. A cry, thin, sharp, fierce, alive. Clara collapsed back against the blankets, sobbing with relief as Rowan's large, calloused hands lifted the child, clearing her mouth, wrapping her in cloth. His rough voice broke, just slightly, as he said, "It's a girl." Tears blurred Clara's vision as she held out her trembling arms. Rowan placed the newborn against her chest, and the child rooted instinctively, her warmth searing against Clara's exhausted body. Her daughter, alive, against all odds. "Rose," she whispered, barely able to breathe the name. "Your name is Rose." Rowan crouched beside them, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, his hands bloodied but steady. Clara looked at him through a haze of tears. "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you." He shook his head softly. "You did this. You and her. I just stood guard." But Clara knew the truth. Without Rowan, neither of them would have survived. Not the storm, not the guns, not even this moment. The fire crackled low, its glow soft against the log walls. Outside, the prairie lay hushed beneath melting snow, the silence broken only by the faint drip of water as icicles gave way to spring. Inside the cabin, Clara held her daughter close, tears streaking her cheeks as Rose nursed softly at her breast. Every breath the child took was proof of life, fierce and undeniable. Rowan sat beside them, his massive frame lowered into the old rocking chair. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion, his hands raw from work and blood. For hours he had not slept, guarding, fighting, helping. Yet his eyes remained fixed on mother and child, as if the world outside no longer mattered. Clara looked at him through the blur of her tears. "Without you," she whispered, voice thin, weak. "Without you, we wouldn't be here." Rowan shook his head slowly, brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead with surprising gentleness. "You did this," he murmured. "You and her." "All I did was stand watch." But she knew it wasn't true. Without him, she would have died in the snow, buried nameless and forgotten. Without him, her daughter would never have seen the light of this fire. Rowan Hail had done more than guard them. He had saved them, even if he wouldn't name it so. For a long while, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the tiny sounds of Rose's breath. Then Rowan spoke, his voice low, rough as gravel, though the words cost him everything to push free. "I lost mine," he said softly, his eyes distant, fixed on the fire. "Winter came too hard. My wife caught sick. My boy too. I was trapped in town when the blizzard hit. By the time I got back," he stopped, jaw tight. "By the time I got back, there wasn't nothing left but the cold." Clara's throat tightened. She didn't speak, didn't intrude on the pain etched into his words. She simply listened, her heart aching with the weight of his confession. "I left the world after that," Rowan continued. His gaze shifted to her at last, and for the first time she saw the naked grief behind the steel. "Didn't see much point in anything. Until you." Tears spilled from her eyes again, falling onto Rose's soft hair. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Rowan." He nodded toward the child, his expression shifting, softening in a way that startled her. "You reminded me what it is to have something worth fighting for again. You and her." The weight of his words pressed against Clara's chest until it nearly broke her. She wanted to thank him, to tell him that his presence had restored her faith in more than survival. But instead she asked gently, "Would you like to hold her?" Rowan's eyes widened slightly, as if the offer startled him. For a moment, he hesitated, his massive hands flexing nervously. Then, slowly, he nodded. Clara shifted carefully, placing Rose into his arms. The baby looked impossibly small against his calloused hands, her tiny fingers curling into fists as she squirmed. Rowan's face tightened with uncertainty, almost fear. But when Rose yawned and nestled against his chest, something broke open inside him. His lips parted, and for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. Not faintly, not guarded. A real, unrestrained smile that lit his tired eyes with a quiet, unexpected joy. "Hello, little one," he whispered, his voice trembling despite its roughness. "You're tougher than you look." Clara watched, her heart swelling until she thought it might burst. The sight of Rowan cradling Rose, his hardened edges softened by the weight of a new life, carved itself into her memory forever. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt something other than fear or sorrow. She felt home. Later that night, after Rose had drifted into peaceful sleep, Clara lay awake, watching Rowan doze lightly in the rocker beside them. She whispered into the quiet, her hand resting protectively over her daughter. "I think we're going to be all right now." And for the first time in months, maybe years, she believed it. Morning came gentle. Sunlight spilled golden through the cracks in the walls, dust motes swirling lazily in the glow. Clara rose slowly, cradling Rose in her arms, and stepped outside into the cool dawn. The prairie stretched wide before her, no longer hostile but alive with promise. Birds called from the trees. The snow melted into rivulets, carrying winter away. Rowan stepped out behind her, boots scuffing softly on the porch. His voice was husky with sleep. "You should be resting." Clara turned, smiling faintly. "I've rested enough." His eyes dropped to Rose and a smile ghosted his lips. "She's got your stubbornness," Clara laughed softly, "and your scowl." For a moment they stood together, watching the sun climb. Then Rowan's face grew serious. "Winter's over, snow's gone. You could head east come summer. Go somewhere safer. Start fresh in a town." Clara blinked, startled. "You're saying we should leave?" "No," Rowan said, meeting her gaze. "I'm saying you could leave. If you wanted. I'd understand." The words hit harder than any bullet. Clara searched his face, saw the truth in his eyes. He meant it. He would let her go if that was what she chose. Her chest tightened painfully, but her voice was steady when she said, No. This is where Rose belongs, where I belong. I'm tired of running. Rowan's jaw worked, emotion flickering across his rough features. And what about me? He asked quietly, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. Clara lifted her hand, resting it gently against his cheek. You belong with us. If you want to. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that was soft, reverent, and full of promises unspoken. A kiss that did not swear forever, but pledged something deeper, the choice to stay, to build, to live. When they parted, Rowan exhaled slowly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Looks like I got myself a family after all. Clara's throat tightened, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. Together they turned back toward the cabin, where Rose stirred softly in her arms. The prairie stretched wide and endless, but for the first time, it did not feel lonely. Against all odds, they were no longer broken, no longer fugitives from fate, just a man, a woman, and a child, a family. As the prairie settled beneath a blanket of twilight, Clara felt the long shadow of her past finally lift. She was no longer a woman running from grief, nor a widow marked for death in the snow. She was a mother, holding her child close, and beside her stood a man who had chosen to fight for them when the world would have turned away. In Rowan's steady strength and in Rose's quiet breath, Clara discovered something greater than survival. She had found belonging, not escape, not endurance, but love, raw, enduring, and forged in fire. And so, in a land carved by storms and tempered by sacrifice, Clara, Rowan, and little Rose chose not merely to endure, but to live as a family. Not out of chance, but by choice. Not in thunder, but in the quiet courage of hands that refused to let go. But what about you? Do you believe family is something fate grants us, or something we build, one hard-earned day at a time? Would you have stood and fought beside Rowan and Clara, or left the past behind to start anew? Your thoughts keep these stories alive. Share them with us below.